Hello and welcome to Backyard Farmer. I'm your host Kim Todd and we're happy you could join us for another hour of good gardening. Joining me on the panel we have gardening experts from Nebraska Extension and UNL Landscape Services. Our bug guy tonight is Jim Kalish.
Good evening, everybody.
Turf and Weeds, Rock Gaswa.
Great to be here, Kim.
Rots and Spots, Kevin Corris.
Hello, hello.
And all those landscape questions, Jeff Culbertson.
All of them.
All of them. If you have a gardening question, just dial 402-472-1212 if you live in Lincoln. Our toll-free number is 800-676-5446. Emails and pictures for future shows can be sent to byf@unl.edu. When you send us a question, please tell us as much information as you can and attach those pictures to the email. You can also follow Backyard Farmer during the week on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, iTunes, Pinterest, all that good social media stuff. Before we get to questions, let's look at samples, and those are scary beasts.
Yeah, those are really large wasps. You know, about midsummer, we start seeing these really hyperactive blackish and blackish blue wasps, and they're called steel blue cricket wasps. And the hint is in the name, of course, of what they do as far as their behavior goes. They're fluttering around on the sidewalks, they'll get on bare ground, and they'll get around rocks, rocky outcrops and cracks and crevices, and are looking for crickets hiding in those crevices, and they pull them out with their mandibles and they sting them, and then they drag them to their burrow that they have prepared. And so, kind of like a cicada killer, instead of feeding on cicadas, you know, they provide their burrows with crickets, you know, those large, juicy, shiny field crickets that are getting larger and larger as the summer progresses. And so they're in their heyday right now. And if you want to see them really be active on a summer's day, go to some of your flowering plants. Like I got these on a white hydrangea today, but also think of the mint plants and any other kinds of plants that are blooming right now. They just love the white. The bush itself might be something like a, I don't know, like a pub, you know. They all gather there to get their drink of nectar for energy, and then they disperse and go do their work in the course of the day. Not really threatening in any sense of the word, although, you know, they flutter so much and are so hyperactive, you might think that they're threatening you or whatever, but they aren't, and they're doing a good job in keeping the cricket population down.
Excellent. I'm glad to know that because they do look a little threatening. Yeah. Okay, Rock, that's kind of a tiny little sample.
Well, I only brought in this little bit because mostly what I want to show, this is white clover, and most people probably recognize it as white clover, but the reason I want to show this is for two reasons. One is, when you look at this flower head on it, people are already saying, well, when do I start controlling broadleaf weeds? And so this white clover, this is a good indicator plant because this is already sort of dispersed its seed and done what it's going to do with that seed head on it. But while it was doing that, spraying it at that point in time was really kind of a waste of time because it was putting all the energy into top growth, into seed production, and it wouldn't translocate the herbicides that we would normally recommend. So this is the first indication that we're getting close. It's still not time. It's still too hot. We certainly don't want to be spraying when you break 95. So it's just an indication that we're still a little bit early. But I'm going to say, let's just think about this a little bit. White clover, and any of the clovers or legumes, fix their own nitrogen from the soil in this symbiotic relationship, et cetera, whatever. So if you leave it on your lawn, they produce a fair amount of nitrogen, and some of it is available to the plant. Not much, but some. But if you control them and they die, then all the nitrogen that is in that plant and the nodules that are in the roots releases, and then you've got where you killed the plant, you've got this big green spot because the turf really greens up there. If you really want to consider not spraying and letting the white clover kind of do its thing, then you can have these mixtures, and that's a big thing right now where people are wanting less and less pesticides being put in, especially herbicides in this case, and maybe they just let the white clover or the bird's foot trefoil or grow. Go ahead and mow it, go ahead and do all the other things, and just let it be. There will be a point where the white clover could dominate a lawn, and in that case, just put on a little nitrogen, and you can usually suppress white clover about 20 to 30% just with a well-timed, good, high-quality nitrogen application. But letting it be can really work. The only time it might not is if you have anyone in your family that's hypersensitive to bees, and they like to roll around in the yard. You know, those are very attractive to the bees, and getting stung is not an option for those people that have to carry stuff around in their pocket and purse in case they get stung. But just maybe let it be, in the words of the Beatles.
Awesome. Love it. Thanks. All right, Kevin, a sad tomato over there.
Yeah, I've got a tomato plant here, and it's suffering from a disease called bacterial speck. And if we do a little zooming here on this leaf, you can see why it has its namesake. So it's a bacterial disease, and it causes these very tiny little blackish brown specks. You can see them in the green tissue and in the yellowish brown tissue. And so the lesions themselves on the green tissue aren't very big, but it causes severe premature leaf senescence. So wherever you see a conglomeration of those little black specks, you kind of see the leaf start to yellow up and senesce and die back. And to see what that looks like on the whole plant, you know, it can get pretty devastating here. And so you see all these bottom leaves are pretty much gone. And that's another thing that's pretty typical with this disease, is that it's going to start at the bottom of the plant and work its way up. It's a bacterium, so it survives our winters in the residue, in that plant material that's been left on the ground over the winter. So it's a bacterial disease. It's going to start from the bottom and work its way up, which means that it can actually get on the tomato fruits themselves, and you can get little black specks, and no one wants that. So what can you do about it? Whenever you see those leaves turn and start to senesce like that, go ahead and remove those lower leaves, and that should help keep that bacterium out of the environment and keep it from working its way onto up the plant. And if any leaves fall to the ground, remove them. So sanitation can go a long ways. If you do want some kind of a chemical option, copper-based products are the only thing that we really have to battle our bacterial pathogens, and they are effective in preventing this disease. It's not a curative, but it is a preventative. So if you can put it on the leaves that are still green, it should prevent some of that bacterial infection. So bacterial speck on tomato, pretty, it's out there in the environment. If you have tomatoes in your yard, you probably have some lower leaf death because of this.
All right, thank you, Kevin. Jeff, that is beautiful.
Yeah, this is kind of fun. After death in your garden, we'll follow up with this. So this is limelight hydrangea. So it's one of the tardiva hydrangeas. And this particular one, Kim and I were talking before the show, it just is gradually getting a little bit bigger every year. So it's up to the over the 6-foot height now. And I cut it back to about 2 feet or so, maybe a little less every spring. So it seems to be doing pretty well. I have it so it faces, actually it's kind of on the northwest corner of my house. So it does get a fair amount of sun, especially at the end of the day, which it seems to like. So,
and you don't have to, it doesn't flop because it's woody, right?
Right, yeah.
So
and cutting it back helps kind of maintain that base stem is increasing in diameter and provides the support. So it's kind of fun.
That is most definitely fun.
Yeah.
And large.
Yeah.
Looks huggable.
Yeah, exactly.
You can hug it after the show.
Those wasps are like that.
Yeah.
All right, Jim, you get the first picture question. And this is a Northeast Council Bluffs viewer. They saw this mound in their yard, thought it was a molehill in a flower bed, and that for scale, the leaves for our viewers, those leaves are about the size of a dime. Notice this entrance and then part of a hive. He's glad he didn't stomp on it. He wonders if it's yellow jackets and wants the confirmation. And
exactly.
Is that what it is?
That's what it's, a yellow jacket nest, and it's built in some kind of a cavity. It started out in some cavity in the soil. And as the colony grows larger, you know, the workers will keep pulling out more and more dirt, so you can have a huge watermelon-size nest in there. It has lots of paper coverings in it, and then you have several layers of comb, paper comb in the middle. And so when at this time of year, those colonies can be fairly large. And so when you come upon something like that, and you're not aware of it, you can very easily become stung because social insects like the bees and wasps are very defensive. So in this case, you know, if it's out of some area where there's not any risk whatsoever, it would be interesting just to watch it and let it be, and then that way they can perform their beneficial role in the landscape in helping to control some of those pest insects. If it is in the way, then it should be treated at nighttime. The entrance should be treated at nighttime with a dust application, just a liberal dust application of carbaryl or 7, and then throw some kind of a heavy object on top of that, and wear long sleeve clothing, and by morning most of them will probably be dead. But if you don't want to risk that, then just have a professional pest management person come on out and take care of it.
Sounds like you need running shoes too.
Yeah, you do. But in the morning, you know, when they're not active and it's cooler, you know, we haven't had those yet recently, but.
All right, thanks, Jim. Rock, this is in Utan, and she says this neighbor's grass, she called it, is creeping into their yard, but that's not grass because it's taken up the grass. What is that and how do we control it?
That's ground ivy. Ground ivy looks a lot like henbit, but it's a perennial, and it's extremely invasive and generally invades yards that are a little low on the nitrogen side. So sometimes, unlike the clover we talked about earlier, you're not going to get rid of this one with putting on a nitrogen application. But usually anything you do to thicken up the lawn would be better, more aggressive mowing perhaps. But that's so thick and invasive in that particular picture that we're going to suggest you're going to have to use a herbicide. Still too early, as I said earlier, so we don't want to be spraying it quite yet. You know, maybe when we get into some cooler nights as well as cooler days, you don't want to spray when the temperature is going to exceed, you know, 80 degrees, 80, 85 degrees during the day, especially at the time you spray. And you want to avoid spraying this time of year as well as the next 2 to 3 weeks because we have vines and tomatoes and stuff that are still trying to do their thing, and all the potential for drift is really, really high. Ground ivy is going to take a fairly aggressive herbicide. You know, you can buy the 3-way type products that all the garden installers sell, and fall is the best time to treat a perennial weed like that, but it's going to take multiple applications. I'm going to suggest you get, there's a number of products out there, I'm not suggesting this one over any others, but there's a Bayer Advanced Brush and Weed Killer, and it's labeled for use in and around the yard, and it's got one product, and the product is called Triclopyr, Tricopyr, I believe is the correct spelling. It's a little bit different in terms of the herbicide, and you can see when you read the label that you have to take certain precautions in terms of wearing gloves and other things. If you really want to get rid of it, that's probably the only thing that's going to be able to knock the ground ivy out above about 90%. You can use a common 3-ways. You're probably going to have to spray 2 to 3 times over the course between now and probably mid-October to get rid of it.
All right, thank you, Rock. Kevin, we had 2 different viewers send us these pictures. They're both from Omaha. Mm-hmm. One of them actually picked more than 250 of these in July, and in August he picked this pile of 407.
Goodness.
They want in area 8 by 15. They both want to know, what are these? Why are they there? And how do we get rid of them?
Yeah, so that's a good picture of where they come up. They come up in the lawn, but this particular fungus, it's called a gyrodon fungus. They're also known as boletes. They grow in association with ash trees. So here's the thing. Emerald ash borer is now here. That's going to be causing a lot of stress and death to our ash trees, and stress and death trigger the sporulation, trigger these big fungal fruiting bodies that you see pop up in the yard. So not surprised that this is an Omaha viewer seeing this. I'm guessing there's an ash tree in the landscape where they found all of these gyrodon fungi. There is really no treatment that we can put out there other than maybe removing that entire ash tree, which may happen here in the future anyway. And just removing the fungal fruiting bodies by hand. It's really the only thing you can do. But gyrodon fungus, kind of cool, but I know it's a nuisance.
And they both had ash, and they both said they were by the ash. So there you go. Perfect.
Cool.
All right, Jeff, cherry tomatoes.
Okay.
This particular person says one of them keeps getting these little black marks on the top, doesn't know what they are, wonders whether he should remove them. He says they're still doing this because I sent him a follow-up question on this, but only one of his plants. And is this a normal thing, or is this a cultivar, or what?
Yeah, you know, looking at it, there are some cultivars that are different colored plants. I've grown black crim, some people have, so there are some darker tomatoes. And looking at this, the fact that it's not covering the whole tomato, it doesn't look like a fungus or a disease. You know, I think it's just a pigment thing with that particular tomato. So he may either have unknowingly bought a particular one that had that, or it just is, you know, a sport. So
Yeah, and there is one called Berry Series or something.
Right, yeah.
It's blueberry.
right,
Yeah, so we'll see. Hopefully they taste good.
yeah.
You know, it can be frustrating sometimes to get things to grow in the shade. Pretty much everybody knows that hostas do well, but for our first feature, we'd like to give you some other shady plant options. We get a lot of questions from viewers about what to do for plants in shade. And while there are people who absolutely love hostas, and we have an awful lot of hostas from which to choose, a truly all hosta landscape in the shade can be pretty boring, and there's nothing in the winter. I made a list of the plants that are growing in shade in my own yard, which has about 2 hours of sunshine a day. I came up with almost 30, and not a one of them is a hosta. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the different plants you can use in a shaded environment. You look first for some texture and some form. One of the other questions that people ask us is, well, I want a lot of color. I want something that blooms in the shade all summer long. Just not going to happen unless you move to annuals. Jack Frost Brunera and his younger cousins are workhorses in the shade. They have what's called a reverse variegation, which means that the blade of the leaf is variegated instead of the veins, and they're sterile, so they're not going to seed themselves all over the shady landscape. We also have one that has beautiful texture and interesting flowers in the rose family of all things, and this is Lady's Mantle. One of the coolest things about it is each part of the leaf holds these little beads of water when it rains. Another good plant for shade is Pulmonaria, and this is one called Roy Davidson, Pulmonaria longifolia. It's a variegation that looks like somebody splattered paint on it. These are mound formers, and like the other two plants we've looked at, they also bloom, but they bloom early in the spring. A lot of people think about ferns as being the quintessential shade plant, and they can be. If you use that ostrich fern, you're going to be sending us an email saying, how do I get rid of the ostrich fern? But if instead you choose one like Lady in Red, it has elegant fronds with kind of a reddish midrib. We also have one called Autumn Fern that actually stays evergreen over the winter in the right kind of shaded conditions. Perennials that offer winter interest, some texture, and certainly some foliage are really great in the shade if you choose wisely. This is Hellebore, and it is one that has leathery leaves, blooms very early in the spring, forms a small colony by seed. Those are leathery broadleaf evergreen leaves. Another elegant one is Epimedium, and this one also blooms early in the spring, has a completely different kind of a leaf structure, and it's accompanied by a little mound former, which is Tiarella. This is one, there's actually a native form, there's a ground cover form, and there's one that is a cross with our common heuchera, or the ones that people love in their landscapes. So these three are going to give you winter interest with their foliage. Last but not least, people like things that flower in the shade that are perennial. This is Corydalus, bright yellow flower. And interestingly enough, this is a calamint called Montrose White. In the mint family seeds itself, the pollinators love it, gives you just a speckle of white in the shade. Shady conditions can really be challenging, and we hope you'll take a look at some of these options and give them a try. And most of those came out of either our courtyard or my yard, and I can pretty much kill anything, so that tells you these are going to work.
Look pretty bug-free.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Not many bugs. They're all over in the backyard farmer garden this year. All right, Jim, you get the next two pictures, and they're kind of together. They're both IDs.
Okay, yeah.
The first is, he titled it A Green Monster, and he wants to make sure that we know that this is from McCook, and he is, as we speak, headed to Canada to fish.
Oh, really?
So what's
That's a good
this one?
idea, isn't it?
Yeah.
That is an unusual one, and that's called a gaudy sphinx. Gaudy, you know, like not very attractive. I think it ought to be called like deep emerald sphinx moth. And it's amazing because this one's a tropical one and we don't very often see it. It lives all the way down in Central America and South America, and once in a while flies up to this far into North America. And just like its relatives, you know, the Pandora's moth and the Akamon sphinx moth, they all kind of feed on grapevines or grape-related plants. But that's an amazing one. I think that's going to be probably a state record and probably a county record.
Cool.
For having that.
And then the second one is, let's see, she is from Geneva, Shickley. Seeing jillions of these.
Yeah, well, if you want to call it an orange sulfur, which doesn't look apparently orange there, but that's one name for it, and the more commonly known name for it is alfalfa butterfly. And they are one of the early ones that do come out, and they persist throughout the season. And so I guess you can say that's one of the Nebraska's part of the wondrous pageantry of Nebraska, because they're always around. And we have plenty of alfalfa and legumes on which the larvae feed. So
Excellent. Lots of fun.
Yep,
Lots
no
of bugs.
problem.
All right, Rock, this is actually a follow-up question with a different picture from a viewer. We answered his fairy ring question, and now he says his yard has yellowed all over. He does fertilize, he does grub control. A couple of weeks earlier, he put on a Scott's Dry fertilizer that said yellow to green in 3 days, but the yellowing has gotten worse. So he wonders what to do. He doesn't want to aerate. He's afraid he'll break the weed barrier. Any thoughts on how to make the gold go green?
Well, one, thanks. You opened the door for me to dispel the myth. You don't, when you cultivate with a core aerator, you don't break the weed barrier. It
Okay.
basically falls back in on itself, and you still get pretty good weed control. There's a lot of data on that, so he can get rid of that one right away. I think this yellowing is, and once again, we don't have all the information we need, but it looks to me like the lawn adjacent to it, the backyard of the other one, is plenty green, et cetera. And I'm thinking that he's got a watering issue. This looks to me more like a watering issue. Other than that, the lawn looks pretty healthy. I would check your sprinkler system. We certainly don't want to be watering every day in this kind of weather. It's already humid enough. The turf doesn't need, to be watered for 10 minutes or 20 minutes every day at this point in time, and that's probably excessive. So maybe every third day, every fourth day. I don't see on campus. I'm guessing you don't water every day.
No.
I've never watered every day, and I think I've watered my bluegrass fescue mixture about 7 or 8 times the entire summer, and it's a lot greener than the yellow lawn you've got. And the fertilizer is not going to react if it's too wet. What happens is nitrogen never really gets a chance to get into the plant because it denitrifies and volatilizes and is released to the atmosphere. So my guess is that looks very much like me, not to be an iron deficiency or anything else. It looks to me that maybe you need to take a look at your irrigation practices and maybe back off the water.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Rock. This is a fun one for you, Kevin, and for the person sitting next to you on your right.
Awesome.
Wonders what this is. They live near Roca. Their second garden, they grew corn, but then this year they got the alien ear. What is it?
It's exactly that. It's aliens. No, it's a fungal disease. It's a smut disease. It's called corn smut, a common smut of corn. It can actually show up on the leaves, on the stalk, on the tassel, but most famously on the ears like that. And it's usually incited by damage to the ear. So if you increase your sweet corn spacings, you should eliminate that or limit the traffic that goes through your sweet corn patch, and it might show up after hail damage or something like that. But the ear gets damaged, and then the fungus gets in there and takes over and creates those big, wonderful, silvery white galls. And the interesting thing is that it's actually edible. Mexicans make a dish out of it called huitlacoche. It's very, very, very good, actually. I've had it before. It's very, very tasty. So there's really nothing preventatively you can do other than trying to prevent that damage and enjoy it. I don't necessarily recommend preparing it because you need to pick it at the right time, and I'm not sure when that is. But this guy may know a little bit more about that and how to prepare it.
Being from southern New Mexico, I can guarantee that smut is an amazingly flavorful thing to put in. And I mean, it's essentially, a microorganism, and each one of those little things was a kernel, at least when it's in the ear and not on the stems and leaves. So that's how much that organism multiplied and created that. This time of year, it's probably a little bit late. It gets a little muddy tasting, having tasted it at multiple times. And I actually have a recipe. I looked one up when I saw the picture. It's called smutty mac and cheese with a pecan crust. And I read it. It looked amazing to me. It makes a really good soup. They make a gravy out of it and pour it over meat. And I can't, not throwing that away makes sense. And one last thing, the Incas used to nick the base of the main stalk to force the infection, because it's soil-borne, to force the infection up so that they would get this infections. And then they'd throw a little soil on it and they'd get the infection, and off they'd go making smutty mac and cheese with a pecan crust.
I love it. All right. Jeff, yours isn't nearly as much fun, but I'm sure our viewer wants to know the answer. This is a Minden viewer that discovered a really big damaged limb in a redbud. They think it's probably from a wind damage or something.
Sure.
And of course, they're wondering whether they can trim this out and still have a viable viable tree. It looks like it's shredding itself all the way down the main tree.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they certainly could. And as nice as the tree looks, I think I would be tempted to do some pruning and take that out of there and see what I have when I'm done. You know, to me, that looks like we had probably, like you say, some straight line winds or something like that. There's a lot of growth. The tree's growing quite well. It looked like there was some pruning on the tree that needs to be done. So there's that. There's some branches wrapping around, and that was included bark, it looked like to me, on those branches. And that's something to watch. We see that with a lot of trees, but it's that branch angle. If the branch angle's too close, you get the bark kind of growing down between the two branches, and then it's easily pulled apart and we have that damage. So redbuds have that. That's one of those things. Our pears have that. Lindens have that. So there's certain species that tend to do that.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Well, our backyard farmer garden is getting rave reviews this year, and the heat is hurting only our master gardeners and not our plants. Let's take a minute to hear from Terry James about what's happening in the backyard farmer garden this week.
This week in the Backyard Farmer Garden, we're doing a little touring again. Last week we looked at all the flowers that were really looking great. This week we're going to check out some of the veggies. We have two beans that are really performing really well. The 2014 Mascot AAS winner looks really good. It's actually a later planting. We kind of waited till all those leaf bean beetles were gone, so they're looking good, not a lot of holes in it. We also have one that we found just in a seed catalog that looked interesting, so we thought we'd try it. It's called Red Noodle. Look, check out these really cool long red beans. Really fun, kids will really love them. We also have two new tomatoes from All America Selection this year. We have Candyland Red and we have Chef's Choice Green. Chef's Choice Green is going to be really hard for us to figure out when it's right because it's a green tomato. But the Candyland Red ones are really fun. They're a little currant type tomato. They look like little grapes hanging on the vines, and they are kind of tasty. We also have a new seeded strawberry that we're trying. It's called Deliz, and it's not too bad. When we can beat the squirrels to it, it kind of has a sweet tart taste. So that's what's happening in the Backyard Farmer Garden this week.
Everything in that garden is doing well, from the rain chain to the sunflowers, and obviously we have another bumper crop of tomatoes. So if you're on East Campus, do come over and check it out. You can actually have a tomato or two because the squirrels are going to get them if we don't. All right, Jim, you get a question from Philly. 35-foot blue spruce with bagworms. What can be done now?
Well,
lots of bags.
The bagworms are so far developed that most any kind of insecticide will not work very well. They're just simply the insecticide can't get to them. The only part that sticks out is just their front pair of legs and their mouth, and they're always eating. So if you're not close to a body of water, one or two compounds or insecticides that could be used would be bifenthrin or cyfluthrin with thorough coverage. If this is a power sprayer situation, that might be okay, or whatever. But if it's an aerial situation, then it gets really complicated. But you might have to take some hits on damage because it really is too late. Pick them off by hand if you can, and then wait till next year and then early on deal with them when they're just after they've hatched out.
All right, thank you, Jim. Rock, what is the deal with nutsedge this year? It is like everywhere, and people are wondering, can they do anything now, or is it too late, too early, or what?
It's not even worth the vengeance at this point in time. It's, and there are people spraying it, but you're not going to see very good control. It's going to burn it back a little bit. You run the risk of damaging possibly your lawn, but also other sensitive ornamentals just with the solvents that are used to dissolve these things. So I'm going to say point blank, you probably don't want to be aggressively going after nutsedge at this point in time. Couple of things though, next year or maybe going into the fall, we know that nutsedge isn't very shade tolerant. So if you're at the lower end of the mowing scale, if you're mowing it 1.5 inches or 2, then you probably ought to kick it up to 3 to 3.5. And you can actually limit it. There was just recently some information that said you can probably knock out 10 to 20% of your nutsedge if it's really thick, just simply by raising your mowing height. And the other thing is get something like Sedgehammer or some of the other commonly used sedge chemicals and get to it as soon as you see it coming in the lawn. That's the only way you're going to effectively control it. And it's going to be kind of a lifelong ambition that you'll pass on to your grandkids.
Right, thanks. All right, Kevin, a Lincoln viewer says they have tomatoes with black spots in the middle.
In the middle of the tomato when they cut it open. Sounds like it could be blossom end rot. You can also get that not just on the blossom end of the tomato, but you can get it on the inside of the tomato. And blossom end rot sounds like it's a disease, and or a disease incited by a fungus or something like that. It's not. It's actually a calcium deficiency. But corrective measures don't necessarily mean adding calcium. A lot of times it's just uneven watering. Plants can only get calcium from the soil when the soil is saturated, and they need a lot of calcium when they're setting that fruit. Also, an overabundance of nitrogen during fruit set can tie up calcium in the soil. So if you're still fertilizing your tomatoes with a heavy nitrogen fertilizer, you might want to cut back on that, and that should help to eliminate it. I guess the last thing you could do is some kind of a foliar application of calcium, but it's typically never it's usually not the fact that there isn't calcium in the environment, it's just the plant's not able to get it very well. So keep that soil saturated and it should alleviate the problem.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Jeff, this is a Murdoch viewer, has hydrangeas, has big weeds. Wonders, can they do something to get rid of the weeds that won't hurt the hydrangeas? Sounds like they want a chemical. Is there another option?
You know, it's really tough with woody plants, just like Rock has been warning us about temperature right now, the time of year, and our woody plants would also be highly susceptible in these high temperatures in this time of year as well. So, you know, if you've got weeds in your hydrangeas, get down on your hands and knees and start pulling some weeds. That's probably your best bet.
All right.
And long term, really the best thing for the plants.
Right. And according to the gentleman sitting to my left, this is Olympic lightning round.
This is the best we can do.
Jeff, are you ready?
Yeah.
We have a Verdun viewer who has cucumbers in pots, has flowers and no cukes. What's up with that?
You know, I'm having that issue with my pumpkins at home too, and I think it's just the heat and the weather. So be patient. Make sure that you may want to shade the pots a little bit so they cool the temperature down.
All right, a Plattsmouth viewer has blackberries for the first year, and they are bitter and taste awful. What's up with that?
You know, it's an acquired taste. I eat a lot of things that no one else will eat, and blackberries can be tart. So, you know, congratulations.
How do you kill the ground cover called Hutinia without killing everything else?
Well, without killing everything else, I don't think you can do that. So again, we're back into pulling stuff and being aggressive with it, and then maybe getting it to the crowns and treating those crowns with something like a glyphosate or something like that.
All right. When do you prune the fall-bearing raspberries?
You know, I would prune after those canes have fruited. So any of those canes that are done flowering and fruiting, go ahead and cut those back.
All right, is it time to dig up bulbs and replant them, or are we too early?
I think we're a little early, and with the heat, I think I'd wait a little bit. Give it a few more weeks.
All right, nice job. You ready, Kevin? We have a viewer who wants to know how often they should change the soil in their containers if what they're growing in those containers is peppers and tomatoes.
Well, if they're not having any problems with root or crown issues and they still got good nutrients, I wouldn't worry about it. I think you need to change it more often because of nutrients than pathogens. If you have a wilt pathogen, change it right away.
All right. What's the deal with yellow leaves on apple trees, and then they also have spots on them right now?
Could be either cedar apple rust or apple scab. We have them both. They both show up earlier and then this time of year as well. It causes the whole leaf to turn yellow and eventually fall off.
And the treatment is?
So we're kind of past the time for treatment. Sanitation can help remove those leaves from the area underneath the tree, and then preventative applications of fungicides in the spring can help.
All right. What does bacterial wilt in cucumbers look like? I mean, what happens?
The plant just wilts and droops and looks really soggy, and then the stem will be squishy and gross.
I thought you were Frankenstein. I didn't know what you were doing.
I'm a wilted.
Or a zombie.
A zombie, yeah.
It's my lightning round, guys. Come on.
Sorry.
The hollyhocks are rusty, all rusty. Anything we can do now?
Lightning. Hollyhock rust? No, right now, unfortunately not. Preventative fungicides in the spring and some sanitation.
I think we give him 2 extra points.
The zombie. Frankenstein.
All right, are you ready, Rock?
I don't know if I can follow that and not laugh, but
We have a Chapman viewer who wants to know how to control honey locust seedlings in their lawn.
generally mowing will take them out, and if not, they can be hand pulled. You can try to spray them with something, any of the broadleaf herbicides, but you're just going to have to be persistent with the mower and keep the lawn healthy. They'll eventually go away.
All right. Should wild strawberry in the lawn be controlled, or should we just let it be? We talked both ways last week.
Your call. If you want to get rid of it, something with triclopyr in it that we mentioned earlier should work really well. Otherwise, just let it be. It's very invasive. It's going to get into your garden and everywhere else. So if it was me, this is one that I would actually aggressively go after.
All right. We have a Parkston, South Dakota viewer who wants to know the right time for the last fertilizer.
We put it, sometimes you go dormant late season, so that we're talking sometime right before Thanksgiving, right in there when the lawn is actually quit growing.
All right. Is it better to mulch or bag your clippings?
It's definitely better to mulch and put that nutrient back down. Probably save yourself one nitrogen application by doing that.
Excellent. Nice job. You ready, Jim?
Okay, yep.
Okie doke. A viewer had maggots in their carrots this year. What do they do about them next year?
Go ahead and plant in another area of the garden because that's either carrot rust, maggot, or carrot curculio. So plant somewhere else.
All right. An Elkhorn viewer says they have bumps on their pussy willow leaves. What's up with that? What do you do about it?
I don't know. I think it's probably something, it's probably a gall formation, which isn't harmful. If it is some kind of disease related or whatever, probably not harmful either if it's still green, so don't worry about it.
Okay, which caterpillars are munching on parsley usually?
Probably black swallowtail for the most part, yeah. And there's a couple generations of them. Enjoy them.
Okay, a Pierce viewer wants to know what kind of a caterpillar would be black with white and orange stripes down the body.
Along the sides of the body would be yellow-striped armyworm. There's been a recent outbreak of those, and then they gradually turn brown. But yellow-striped armyworm on all kinds of crops and ornamentals.
All right. Are the butterflies late this year?
No, not really. Maybe shy. I don't know. It's hard to explain those kinds of things. But eventually their populations, get higher and higher, and then you're going to see more and more of them. Of course, the heat really can be hard on a lot of insects and stressing them out as well.
So we got 3 golds and a participation ribbon. I got a participation ribbon.
I love it. All right.
We had swallowtail butterflies on honeysuckle this morning on city campus. Quite a few.
Oh, that's cool.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So they're coming
Tigers.
around.
We've seen tiger swallowtails, giant swallowtails. Another one that
These were
kind of migrates.
these were
from the north.
big, so
Yeah.
maybe they're giant. They're giant,
then,
kind of
Giant
dark
wormus.
blue.
Yeah, and then the black swallowtails.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. All right. What has Gladys brought us?
Well, she gave us a couple fun things. Obviously, the yellow here is our state flower, the goldenrod. So it's a native perennial. She says it can be very aggressive. I have some at home, and it's now everywhere at home. So that's one of the weeds that we pull in our beds, or goldenrod. And late bloomer, hers is actually, mine hasn't started really blooming yet, but hers are a little farther along than mine right now. So that's very pretty. And then the sunflower, the 2 that we have here, the orange ones, Tithonia. So Mexican sunflower, also a late bloomer. And some of the names out there that you might find are Goldfinger, Torch, and Sundance, and it likes full sun. So really both of these like full sun. I have my, in kind of the verge at home with my goldenrod, does pretty well there.
And that Tithonia is kind of a little used flower. That's really a beautiful orange in the landscape. So thanks as always to Gladys. I did see goldenrod blooming in the ditch on the way to Kearney last week. So it's some places it's flowering already. All right, Jim, you get picture number 3. This is a viewer in South Sioux, and has this bee thing, and then it is doing this damage to the underside of his grape leaves, and apparently is making white fluff balls.
Yeah.
And he's wondering how much damage. What's the bee and how much damage?
It's just one of those I think that we can appreciate more than can be concerned about it damaging anything. That example in the image is probably pretty heavy because most of the time they spread that damage out among leaves much more broadly. But that's called a wool carder bee. And it's a fairly recent one that has come over from Europe. And of course there's other species that are related to it as well. But their habit is to pull off the fuzz. Lamb's ear is a favorite one. So they pull that off with their mandibles and they take it back to their nest. They're actually a leaf cutter bee, but they don't cut leaves like we think of leaf cutter bees as doing. They find some kind of a crevice somewhere and they'll bring their provisions there in that little crevice. And then they kind of insulate it with all of this fluff and fuzz. And then they'll create another partition and create a series of cells in that fluff. And it's a protective, insulative kind of a fluff. And so it's interesting. Usually not detrimental in any sense. They're just fun to watch out in the garden as they're gathering that fluff and holding it with their mandibles to take it back.
Fun. All right. Thank you, Jim. All right, Rock. We had a person that we actually know who had some sod put down, and it is not exactly the right color. So can you talk a little bit about what you should expect with sod and then how you keep it looking good or get it to knit?
So, and I happen to know this individual, you and I both do, basically he said it came in really brown and then it got browner. So I'm not sure what degree of brown that is, but he sent me a picture of the day it was sodded, and I'm going to say that sod got hot in the roll, and probably was, there was a little bit of green in it, but there wasn't going to be any recovery from that. So, with all due respect to the company that tried to put it in, that sod set in the pallet maybe a little bit long, overheated, and then they put it down. But for those people that get green sod and then they throw it on there, they're throwing it themselves, because a lot of places will sell you the sod and you can do the work yourself, which is great. But what you need to know is that the soil underneath where you put the sod needs to be moist, not sopping wet, but moist. Because if it's dry, it's going to suck the moisture right out of that sod that generally comes with a little bit of moisture in it, and it'll shock the plant. And sometimes you'll get that kind of browning that you saw in that one, but I think he started with brown and it just got progressively worse. So I think he's going to have a conversation with the people that did the installation. But for those of you that get green sod, it's in pretty good shape. You want to make sure that the lawn, the soil is relatively moist, not sopping wet, but relatively moist, so it doesn't shock the plant if it's too dry and sucks the moisture out of the sod when you lay it down, because there's really no recovery from that. It goes into a permanent wilting point and it's pretty much toast.
All right, thank you, Rock. This is a viewer who found this thing on her brick chimney. It's shaped like a heart, but is there a heart under it? And what is the goo? What is that?
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure that is a slime mold rather than a fungus. Slime molds are actually protists, and they are saprophytes, so they're just eating some kind of a carbon-based material that's on that wall. You see them show up in mulch piles in the lawn and apparently on inert objects like walls. So it's a slime mold. You can just get rid of it probably with a soaker hose if it's too unsightly. Otherwise, just enjoy your little love mold going there.
And my guess is there was a heart form behind it, and it kind of looked like maybe it slimed over the top of it.
Can't explain the shape, but it looks like a slime mold.
Okay, all right. Jeff, really simple question. We don't know where this viewer's from, but she wants to know when you harvest hazelnuts, and that looks like a nice crop. And you just happened.
I brought some hazelnuts. So, with any of our trees that produce an edible nut, so walnuts and hazelnuts and really any of those, typically we look at the end of August, first part of September is when a lot of these things are going to be ripe, usually. With hazelnuts, and really with any of them, we want them to try to ripen as much as they can on the tree. And obviously, in this area, well, we're battling our squirrels. Yeah. And so as someone who has half a dozen hazelnuts at home and pawpaws and persimmons, that the squirrels have to take a bite out of everything for me before I get to take a bite out of them. So it is a trick to kind of figure that out. And you can see the one I have here, the one on the left is starting to brown. The husk is starting to brown, and the nut on the inside is starting to turn brown as well. So to me, that's an indication that the fruit is on its way to getting ready. The one on the other one here is not quite as ready yet, and so I would wait a little bit longer on that one. But that's going to be the trick, is kind of waiting for those things. And you may have to test a couple just to make sure that they're ripe enough that they're edible and not too bitter. So.
Or set up a trail cam and a lawn chair.
Yeah, that's right. But I have a purple hazelnut at home that I watched, and this year was a grand year, hundreds of nuts. And I'm down to 2. And they just shredded them long before they were ready. They went in and just gutted them all. And I found one whole one on the ground the other day, so I'm protecting it with a cage at home. So.
Well, Jeff, some people don't know, Jeff and I are neighbors, probably. There's one house in between us, and somebody is feeding, and there's corn cobs everywhere, right? Yeah, right. And the squirrels are planting. I said this a couple of weeks ago when I was on. And so everyone's lawn has corn growing in it.
Yeah.
Right? So it's I want to find who's ever feeding the squirrels and see if we can convince them to move.
All right. Well, we've been getting a lot of questions about rusty plants recently, and because of that, we thought we'd let Kevin show us a few samples and tell us what you can do about the rust.
Well, this year was a really good year for rust diseases in the landscape. Today I'd like to talk to you about how to identify rust on your landscape plants, which of your landscape plants may end up succumbing to rust, and what we can do about it to keep these rust fungi from the landscape and keep our plants beautiful. Now, rust fungi, as their name applies, create symptoms on the leaves of plants that are bright yellow to orange colored or rust colored. On the top side of the leaf that's infected, you may see this bright orange color or yellow color, but it's not until you flip that leaf over and examine the bottom side that you see another very characteristic symptom of this disease. And what you're going to see are these finger-like projections coming out of each lesion, and those finger-like projections are what we call acial spores. These are the spores that are going to go and reinfect the alternate host plant. Rust fungi have a number of hosts that they can infect in our landscape, from hollyhocks to penstemon to blue stem grasses to a number of woody ornamentals. Rose bushes and apples, including ornamental and fruiting apples, are all hosts of rust diseases. There are several different species of rust that prefer different temperature regimes, from moderate temperatures to really warm temperatures. Most rust fungi need a layer of standing water on the plant's surface to cause infection. So trying to maintain low amounts of leaf or up above ground surface water on the plants will help reduce the likelihood of rust infections. It's good to go out and scout your plants and know which plants in your garden are susceptible to rust diseases. Usually rusts are cosmetic and rarely result in the death of the plant. However, if you have infection year after year, it may warrant a fungicide application. Fungicides containing the active ingredients strobilurin or propiconazole are active against treating for rust fungi, but need to be applied earlier on in the season. Being middle August now, early August, we're a bit past the window for treatment. However, early spring, if you know a plant is succumbing to rust diseases, an application of either strobilurin or propiconazole-based fungicide can provide some protection against rust diseases in the landscape.
Stand by. Your first step in avoiding rust is really always going to be choosing disease-resistant plants. Avoiding that overhead watering and good sanitation are also good practices that are going to keep those plants from turning bronze. And we were talking off air about a couple of cultivars that we think are not rusty. One of them is Aristocrat and the other one is Flower Eye, or the dwarf Korean. So it'll be interesting to see if they stay that way. All right, Jim, last picture questions. We have a cottonless cottonwood lost the leaves, cottonless cottonwood snapped off, and there was the culprit with tunnels and wood shavings. And then the other one was a maple, hundreds of carpenter ants, and then saw dust at the base, and then saw this grub-looking thing.
Two different kinds of grubs.
Yeah.
The first one is a borer, a round-headed borer it's called, and that my guess is probably because it was up above the ground. In the cottonless cottonwood, it would probably be poplar borer, which often will bore into those junctions where the branches meet the trunk and completely riddle the trees, especially when they're under stress. The other one is Osmoderma. It's a white grub, And it's one that actually feeds in the dead centers of trees. And so it's not that it causes the problem, it's just that when you get a dead center inside of a tree, you get that decaying wood. And so you're going to get carpenter ants that will utilize that for nesting, and eventually they will expand into that as their nest gets larger. But then you get these Osmoderma grubs, which are bigger than my thumb, and they feed on that rotted wood, and they create this wonderful, friable, granular, I call it humus or some kind of a soil. As many trees as you cut down, you've probably
we'll get
seen
it
it.
in oaks, and they're huge grubs.
They're
I think
huge
I've run
grubs.
some down to you before.
But it's a great example of this whole cycle, where you start with a plant and then you eventually end up with this nice rich soil medium that you can use for growing plants again.
Yeah. They're eaten size, those grubs.
Oh, yeah. Have you ever tried it?
No, I haven't, but
They're good with
I
corn
never
spot.
have.
No, or not. All right, Rock, your picture is of a viewer who had, unfortunately, hail damage and got a new roof replaced and came home to this in various spots all over the lawn and wonders, even after pumping the water to it, is it toast?
Yeah, I think the viewer said something about it being about a month, and that's not going to regrow miraculously. It's that was on there long enough, and some people will say, well, how long can it stay on there? Depends on the conditions at the time you put it on. If it's early spring and it's 50 degrees, probably stay on there 2 or 3 days without seeing appreciable damage. If it's the middle of the summer like it is now, maybe 2 hours, maybe more than enough. So try to keep stuff off the lawn in the middle of the summer. Slip and slides, pools, those kind of things. And in that case, that needed to be pulled off. You can sod patch in there. If it's bluegrass, the rhizomes may still be alive, but I'm going to say that's been sitting there a month, and I'm going to question whether they're going to get anything back. So reseeding this spring, get it. You can dormant seed, or you can seed somewhere around the 15th of September and get that reestablished.
All right, thanks, Rock. Kevin, this is a Weston viewer. The maple is 20 years old, gets black spots, and then the leaves die and fall off. Started about 2 years ago, spread to a couple other maples. What do we have here?
Yeah, that picture there kind of looks like tar spot. I would ask the viewer to look at it closely and see, and then that picture does not look like tar spot. So they may have tar spot and some other issues too, but tar spot will be really greasy. It'll look like tar on the leaf, and so it's pretty diagnostic. So if you have this real shiny black spot that's actually raised up out of the leaf surface, that could be tar spot. That second picture we saw is what I would call interveinal firing back. So it's in between the veins and it's firing back, and that's usually an indication of water stress, which may mean there's a root issue or a trunk issue, something in the stem that's preventing water up into those leaves. It's hard to determine what. But there might be a deeper issue there. So just try to take care of the tree. Check the trunk maybe for any obvious cankers or anything like that. That might be it. Otherwise, it could just be a root issue or a planting issue.
All right, thanks, Kevin. And as long as we're talking maples, Jeff, you have one too. This is a young maple, has a root wrapped around the trunk, wonders whether he should go ahead and cut that off or start over.
Yeah, I think I would. That's the classic stem girdling root, or SGR, as us arborists like to use that. So we're the only ones who know what we're talking about. Yeah, and so what I would do is see if I could chase that root and cut that, get some loppers in there and see if we can pull that root out and cut that. At this stage, that's the best thing for the tree. I think it'll survive and be fine.
All right, thanks. Well, we have a pile of announcements tonight, the first of those being another Backyard Farmer Garden Open House this Saturday, 10 to 12, east of Keim Hall. We have second one is a tomato tasting, the third annual, down in the Beatrice Public Library with a number on the screen, and that is Tuesday, August 16th. We have an Iris Society sale in Omaha, Friday the 19th, 2 to 8. Number on the screen on that one. And we are going to be at the fair. So Wednesday the 31st, we'll be there pretty much all afternoon in the Nebraska building in Grand Island. So come give us your best shot. We have just a very few seconds left, Jim. Would we see pinking needles on spruce from spider mites? Would they cause the pinking potentially?
That would have to be late damage. In other words, spruce spider mites is an earlier season damage. That could be in conjunction with followed by desiccation of the needles or something, or it might be something, if it's pinkish, it might be something that Kevin can explain.
If it's the inner needles and the outer needles are still blue, like the youngest needles are still blue, but the old needles are pinking up, it could be Rhizosphaera needle cast. If it turns subsequently purple and brown and falls off, that may be what it is.
That's what it is. All right.
Treatment happens in the spring
unfortunately.
with that.